Ladies and gentlemen, fight fans all around the world, let's talk some boxing. You're watching What You Need. Alright, I was inspired by Boxing Beats and Rhymes video on defending the indefensible Andre Berto to do this video. Initially I was going to do quality versus quantity, and then I changed my mind. I'm going to do this: the contribution of fighters to the sport of boxing and its evolution. And it's basically going to be a challenge thrown out to you, the casual fan, as you will see. So let's get into it. Now obviously the modern sport of boxing today has changed drastically from its inception, from the first time when it was glove boxing that was introduced and popularized by John Sullivan, who was the first boxer to put on a pair of gloves and make it popular. Before that, it was bare knuckle brawling, and before that, it was an illegal sport that was basically utilized in brutality amongst the lower class. The middle class had nothing to do with it. The upper class had their own version of the sport, which was a sort of gentleman's sport. But they did associate, or they did work with the lower class and sponsor them for their entertainment privately. Because of its illegal nature, they didn't want to be seen publicly associated with it. Sullivan is known as a very key and influential player in the development of the modern sport of boxing as we know it today with gloves. Now I'm going to talk about another fighter who has contributed to the sport of boxing, but in a different way, and he's not very popular at all. No one knows about him. So I just talked about a popular fighter, a fighter everyone knows, at least historians know. And now I'm going to talk about a fighter that not many people think about when they think about change in the sport of boxing. And I'm fast tracking all the way up to the 1990s. I'm talking about a fighter named Randy Smith. I've done a piece on Randy Smith, and for those of you who know who he is, good for you. For those of you who don't know who he is, his record is like the record of a bum. But there's an interesting thing about Randy Smith, and if you go watch his fights, you'll see what I'm talking about. Randy Smith took pleasure in making fighters miss or not land on him or block shots. Randy Smith was a very, very excellent defensive fighter, but he lost a lot of fights because he didn't have sufficient offense. Now, Randy Smith, there's nothing flattering about him except for this. Randy Smith was not knocked out, but he also faced opponents such as Mike McCallum, Michael Nunn, Chris Eubank, Bernard Hopkins, and other high-quality opposition in that time. And all of them learned something from Randy Smith, because all of them thought they could knock him out. And Randy Smith's life and career, he died abruptly at the age of 41, I think it was. But the important thing here is he was able to contribute to the sport of boxing, passing on to these younger fighters additional elements to their game so that they could enhance their game, enhance their defense, compose themselves with their offense. And it's an invaluable contribution that probably is going to be overlooked in the archives of history because he's not a prominent name and he didn't have a prominent record. So what is my challenge to you guys? Very briefly, my challenge to you is not only to look at the fighters with impressive records and impressive achievements, even though that's absolutely important and they were essential and pivotal to how the sport of boxing changed, but also we must pay attention to some of the fighters who may look like they are bums and have bummy records, but actually contributed certain skill sets to the fighters of their generation. They passed on certain things, certain knowledge. Not only that, but we must look at also these fighters' children or the generations that came after them, if they became trainers or whatever, and passed on that information to future generations. I always think of Emmanuel Burton, who had a non-impressive record. In fact, Emmanuel Burton is known as the drunken master of boxing. And what's impressive about Emmanuel Burton was not so much his wins and losses, but what he was able to impact on the current greatest boxer of this generation, at least popularly accepted greatest boxer of this generation, Floyd Mayweather Jr., who said of Emmanuel Burton, he's the guy that gave me my toughest fight. And not his toughest fight because of any physical constraints, but a mental constraint where he realized this guy mentally was not going to go anywhere. And the way how Emmanuel Burton was able to move and twist his body, Floyd had never seen before. So what I'm trying to tell you is, every fighter that you could possibly get your eyes on, if you can see every possible fight you can of every possible fighter, that would benefit you immensely, because you're going to learn about fighters who contributed to the sport of boxing, but they're not remembered for what their contributions are, or they're not even noticed for their contributions. Only the boxers who are probably prominent might highlight them by mentioning them, but otherwise, if they didn't mention them, nobody would know. I challenge you to look for not just the prominent boxers like John Sullivan and the greats like Sugar Ray Leonards and Harry Krebs and Sam Langfords and the Jack Johnsons and Benny Leonards and the Sugar Ray Robinsons, Muhammad Ali's. But I also challenge you to look for the fighters, and there's so many of them, and some of them have really remarkable records and achievements, but look for the fighters also who contributed and sculpted the sport of boxing, who history may have forgotten, or because of their records nobody really paid attention to, but only the boxers or a future generation of boxers have paid attention to. Remember, as the generations go along, more information is passed down, and from generation to generation, if the fundamentals are passed on as well, you actually get better and better, even though people may not perceive it that way. Anyway, that's my take on it. I challenge you to that. I hope you guys accept the challenge and move on with that challenge, and do have always a great one.